Welcome back to the We Are Here Women in Art Symposium, supported by the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is a symposium that explores in greater depth some of the themes that came up during the course of setting up and opening the exhibition We Are Here, Women in Art at Cambridge Colleges, which opened in the beginning of March, but of course at the moment we can't welcome you into the gallery. We Are Here looks at the presence of women in college art collections, and this is going to become clearer as we go on today, what that means and how the show was put together. Before I introduce the panelists for today, I wanted to share my own personal connection with the body of work that will be discussed tonight, The Ladies by Melanie Manchot. If someone were to rifle through my wallet, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you did, you would find a very beaten up postcard. And I've got it here. It'll all make sense when we start the discussion. So ever since I first saw The Ladies at Kettle's Yard in 2018, I've been carrying this postcard around with me. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, but over the years, it has become a sort of reassuring talisman for me that I take out and look at from time to time. So now you know that I love The Ladies by Melanie Manchot. Imagine my delight when I went to King's College to have a look at their art collection, to find that one of the images in the series, The Ladies' King's Dining Hall, was actually hanging in King's Dining Hall. What this meant was that I could bring this work into We Are Here, the exhibition, as it was part of a college art collection, as King's had acquired one of the edition that was produced of the work. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to interview Melanie for the gallery blog, which you can all find online, and learnt some of the background to the project and how the artwork came about. I think most of us know that artworks do not magically appear fully formed in galleries and museums. Harder to shift is that idea of the artist as a lone figure, disconnected from the world, somehow above it. But this too has been largely discredited, especially when it comes to contemporary art. What we will look at today is something that takes us one step further. The artist collaborating in the fullest sense of the word with institutions and communities to bring exceptional, insightful work into being. There's a discussion today will be shared by Andrew Nairne, director of Kettle's Yard, and a key figure in the commissioning of the series. We also have photographer and filmmaker Melanie Manchot with us, who has recently won an Outset Award for a film project for the Liverpool Biennial. We're also joined by Shahida Rahman, born and raised in Cambridge, an author and a community organizer who participated in the making of the series. I'm just going to bring our panelists on and invite Andrew to start the proceedings with an introduction to the panel. We'll get there.
Hello? Yes.
Hello.
Verona, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'm director of Kettle's Yard, and I'm going to be in conversation with Melanie Manchot and Shahida Rahman. I think I'm very proud to have a small association, in a sense, with this remarkable series of works called The Ladies 2017. And unfortunately, I didn't see the show at the Hyung Gallery, and we were just discussing it. I hope it will reopen and I'll be able to see the whole We Are Here show. But obviously I was delighted that the work that King's College, Cambridge bought, which hangs in the dining hall, and the photograph is of a work in the dining hall, is part of the exhibition. I just want to say a few words about how this commission came about and the story, in a sense. And then we will turn to Melanie, who's going to give a brief overview of, I think, not all of your work, Melanie, but some of the work that's particularly relevant. Maybe there's the notion of portraiture in Melanie Manchot's work and how it's relevant to this particular series. And then I'll very much want to hear from Shahida about what it felt like to be a participant and how you even heard of the project in the first place. So The Ladies and Melanie Manchot's work was part of an exhibition called Actions, The Image of the World Can Be Different, which opened on the 10th of February 2018 and was the sort of relaunch, reopening show of the new Kettle's Yard. We'd been closed for 2.5 years. It was a 14-year project. It took £11.5 million. So we did think we wanted to open with a splash. And so we ended up doing a show of 38 artists. Around 30% of those artists were from a Black and minority ethnic background. That was very important. The whole intention was that it would be diverse and dynamic. And indeed, for those of you who saw Actions, it's called Actions, The Image of the World Can Be Different. You will have found works in the lift, in all of the rooms of Kettle's Yard, in the house, the Kettle's Yard house. It really was intended to be an expansive exhibition. Indeed, our sort of phrase about the exhibition was that it would reflect the energizing diversity of art now and seek to reassert the potential of art as a poetic, social, and political force in the world. Now, in 2017, when we were thinking about the exhibition and imagining it, I was very determined that we, first of all, had the opportunity to commission some contemporary artists, but also that the exhibition would reflect the community in Cambridge, that it would somehow connect in a real way to those who we think of as our sort of immediate audience, our immediate, those who we connect with around us in Cambridge. And I was particularly thinking to some extent of the great American artist, Black artist, Kerry James Marshall. And I was involved in an exhibition of Kerry James Marshall's work back at Modern Art Oxford in around 2005. And I got to meet Kerry. And I remember him very much, as he does often, saying that when he was a child, he would go into the museums in Los Angeles, where he was brought up, and then in Alabama. And of course, he didn't see images that looked like him. He didn't see images of Black people. And in a sense, he's made it his life work to make sure that when you go into a museum, you will see some images of Black people in his work. And I was trying to think, how can we have some works in this Action exhibition which will be immediately reflective of our local community, of the diversity of that community? So that was one starting point. The other starting point was Noam Garbo. Garbo is an extraordinary 20th century artist, born in 1890, died in 1977. He was a friend of Jim Eade, who created Kettle's Yard. He brought up in Russia, then he lived in Berlin and Paris, and eventually, during the war, he ended up as a sort of effectively a refugee in the UK, and invited by Ben Nicholson, we find Noam Garbo, already a successful artist. He's in St. Ives with Ben Nicholson, Barbara Hepworth, and that community of artists. And in 1944, he was asked by Horizon magazine, which was a sort of literary cultural magazine, to really say, what did he feel about making art? What could the purpose of art be? What value could it have during this terrible Second World War, during this war? And he wrote a remarkable letter to Herbert Reed, who was a critic and a poet and a great art figure of that period. And in the letter, at one point, I tried to guard in my work the image of the morrow we left behind us in our memories and foregone aspirations, and to remind us that the image of the world can be different. And I just caught this last bit, the image of the world could be different. It felt very contemporary, although it was written in 1944. And so we decided to combine the word actions, because we wanted to do a show that was about the impact that art can have, its kind of live effect, with this, we combined it then with this, if you like, sort of connected title, The Image of the World Can Be Different. So where does Melanie Manchot come in? Well, I didn't know Melanie's work terribly well, but I had seen a remarkable series made actually originally in 2004, and I'm hoping, Melanie, you'll talk about it in a moment or two, called Group and Locations, in brackets, Moscow, 2004. And I saw it, I think, at the Whitechapel Gallery in London. And I quite often describe this work because I love it so much, and I can't do it on video, but I sort of dance around a bit when I describe it because I have visions of Melanie making it. As I understand it, Melanie is in Moscow. There is a law in Russia at this point that you're not meant to congregate without permission. You're simply not meant to kind of suddenly huddle into a group. You might be having a radical conversation. But Melanie decides to, in very public spaces, an airport, I think a sort of shopping center, to try and stop a number of people who are just walking around and ask them to just pause for a moment while she takes a single photograph of those 15 to 20 people just standing there looking towards her. It's just like a snapshot. And I think it's an extraordinary piece because the people in the photograph will never meet again. It was just a moment. So it says something about the nature of photography, the idea of holding something. Of course, it was radical and provocative in the context that you weren't meant to effectively, you create a group through the photograph, the very thing that is a kind of effectively against the law. But also the photographs have an extraordinary sort of agency and power and poignancy, even though these people don't know each other and they're looking at us and they don't know us either, the viewer. So there was something about Melanie's work that was more than a photograph. It was some kind of, like a sort of activist. It's like I suppose a very extraordinary activist poster, but even more than that, much more, had many other meanings and layers. So I'm very excited about that series. And then Melanie was also working in Northwest Cambridge as an artist in residence. So I sort of was seeing Melanie a little bit context. And then the other part of this, but we will come to this again a little bit later, because we really want to talk about the genesis of the work and the way it was set up, which is very important, the process, as well as what I hope we'll have time to discuss what we actually have now with Shahida. But I met, now let me find my note here, I met Nairne Islam at an event, and we had a good chat, and I said, we're looking for a sort of community or a group to work with on a project. And she said, well, I'm part of the sort of Bangladeshi community in Cambridge, we could work with you in some way. And that was sort of it, really. I sort of stood back at that point, and Karen Thomas, our terrific community officer at Kettle's Yard, really took it on from there. And we'll follow that up, what happened next, a little bit later in this discussion. So very large show, 38 artists, but actually quite a small number of commissions. And I would say that Melanie Manchot's work, The Ladies, among the one we were, incredibly pleased to have helped to commission and to sort of, if you like, prompt at the beginning. But of course, it's Melanie Manchot's talent as an artist and the way she worked in collaboration with this group of women that made these remarkable works. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to ask Melanie to say something about her work, particularly in this context. I'll then bring Shahida in. We will chat for around, how are we doing? For around another, after about 40 minutes. And then I'll be looking at the Q&A part of my screen. And I very much hope those of you who are watching live, and thank you for doing so on such a hot day, I hope you'll ask questions and we can bring your questions in, and then we'll finish by 7:30. So I hope that made some kind of sense. And I'm now going to pass to Melanie Manchot. Melanie.
Thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen. So Perona, if you could let me share the screen. And hopefully, does that work? Hold on 1 second, share. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. So for me also a really warm welcome and thank you for joining us tonight here on Zoom. You've probably all been on many Zoom webinars, and on a hot day, it's a particular pleasure to have some of you here with us and to share this kind of discussion with you. So over the next 10-15 minutes, I'm just going to present a section of my work, not a complete overview, but particularly kind of look at the sort of notions of portraiture, groups, communities, collective action that are sort of mainstays that run through the entire practice and have done from the very beginning. But also the kind of terms that have already come up are very central to the practice: collaboration, participation, and in fact co-authorship. So, portraiture, collaboration, co-authorship. The image you're seeing at the moment is from a series that's fairly recent. It's called 1118 and was made over the course of 7 years with one young girl from the age of 11 to 18, and looked at portraiture in a very particular way. The sort of idea that portraiture is something that is mobile and that has also changed phenomenally since probably we were thinking about portraiture in terms of paintings, commissioned paintings, hierarchies. Portraiture are not simply about likenesses, they convey so much more and always have done. But we're also finding ourselves at a very particular crossroads in terms of portraiture, where everybody's making portraits all the time and sharing them all the time and uploading them all the time. So the whole notion of what a portrait is kind of really under rediscussion and a huge rethinking. So while we were making this series 1118, and the girl in the image is my daughter, the whole notion of the term selfie came about. So the way 1118 was made was very much an analogy to Warhol, filming her for 1 minute every minute for 7 years, which made a total of 84 minutes and then became a video installation. Portraiture for me from the very beginning, literally from when I was at the RCA in the early 90s, was initially always about women. It was always about the representation of women and the question how representation actually functions and how it functions politically. And I do feel that particularly in the 1990s, I was very strongly committed to notions of, well, the history and the theory of feminism and how I could work with that in practice. And particularly sort of theoreticians like Judith Butler and the ideas around the construction of subjectivity and the performativity of gender were really, really influential for me and still are. And I think they are also very relevant to a lot of the discussions at the moment about the post-human, about the kind of ecologies that we are kind of asked to consider in a way of thinking towards the kind of very precarious future that we are, in a sense, facing. But to come back to the work and move on to some of the other series, I'm jumping a little bit backwards to 2000 and Moscow. And what was interesting is that until that time, really, I'd been photographing women that I know and that I have personal contact with, my mother, particular kind of people in my environment. And in 2000, I had this really interesting invitation to go to Moscow and streetcast people and photograph them for a magazine. What came out of that in a sort of longer series of actually 3 or 4 years was a series called Moscow Girls, where I looked at their performance of a particular kind of surface towards what they felt a young woman should embody, what she should look like, what kind of gestures she might perform towards a sort of sense of being in the world. But to come to what Andrew already alluded to, Moscow Girls was in a sense the starting point for what has in a sense become a more significant series, which is Groups and Locations Moscow. And Andrew, you do remember correctly many of the kind of details of how this story came about and how the series came about. So while I was working on Moscow Girls, I was looking into the history of Russian photography and came across a series of a vast archive, in fact, anonymous images, group portraits. They're all called types and views of anonymous people standing in fields, in city squares. And it was an anthropological ethnographic enterprise that was sort of state funded to send photographers into the far reaches of this huge country to understand what the places, the locations, and the people might look like. So I looked at these images and was immediately fascinated. So until this time, I hadn't really done any group images or group portraiture, but it just sparked something in my mind at the time. Now, what was interesting is exactly what Andrew already said, that at the time, this is 2003, when I began the series, in Russia, they emitted a law that no longer allowed people to congregate with more than 4 people. And it was ostensibly to kind of curb terrorism during the Chechen War. At the same time, and already in place, was kind of a restriction against photography in public places, but that simultaneously with this other law was heightened. So one was no longer allowed to photograph in public places, in front of churches, in front of government buildings, but also in the metro, in front of big businesses. So the photography and street photography became hugely curtailed. So these 2 restrictions against civil liberty really became the starting point, along with this historical research for this body of work called Groups and Locations. And I did indeed go into the streets in front of St. Saviour's Cathedral. The Park of Economic Achievement was the previous image, and this one, which is literally in front of the Red Square, and stop people in their tracks. So they're literally just pedestrians, bypassers, and ask them whether they would be willing to participate in a group portrait. It would take 5 minutes. They stop where they are, and we set up the camera. I explain the kind of process to them. We show them the old photographs, but we also explain that it is a form of mini protest. So there is very much a political charge around these images. And these people know that they shouldn't be standing there. They also know that this is contravening a whole bunch of restrictions. So we made it very clear, if police comes, you leave, we make sure that we keep the attention of the police so that none of these people would get into any trouble. And the police turned up quite a few times. This series was really the start of my continually ongoing interest in group portraiture, and it probably will continue forever, because I think group portraiture in its many, many, many forms is such a powerful way to articulate maybe something very profound about humanity and our place in the world. I do very strongly believe that we as individuals do understand our place in the world through our inherent sociality and through, in a sense, our embeddedness within social structures. And group portraits are always about a positioning of oneself in relation to others, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And I think group portraiture in the wider sense, also the performativity of group portraiture, allows me to speak about these kind of questions of how continually we reinvent and rethink our place in the world, something that's really present and really important at this particular moment in time. So I will show you a few other series fairly quickly before we then come to the ladies. This is a series made in Berlin straight after Groups and Locations, based on a series of postcards in Berlin from 1905, 1906. And I was there exactly 100 years later in 2005, 2006. And this series of postcards gave exact address and date of when these old images were taken. So I took that as a kind of, as the rules for game, as a kind of instruction to go back to the exact places and take photographs with the now residents, shopkeepers and owners of these buildings, and invite them to stand in place of these historical images. So this is right in the center of Berlin, Linienstraße, and you'll see with the next image that the building itself hadn't changed at all. So there you go, that's the contemporary building in 2006. Another one, Amandastraße, another sort of different neighborhood, a set of people who now live and work in this building, and the historical one. And they were presented side by side to give us a sense of the history of a particular place and its people. Why is that important? Just to stay with this for 1 second. Berlin, probably more than any other city in Europe, bears the scars of the 20th century. It is marked so deeply by the 2 world wars, by the division into East and West, by the Cold War, the Berlin Wall. So its architecture is so imbued with historical significance. So looking at these streets 100 years apart was a really interesting way of engaging with that particular history. Architecture, I think, recurs over and over. Public space recurs over and over. Being in architectural settings, inside and outside, and forming a relationship to the public spaces we jointly and collectively inhabit is a really significant part of what the practice intends to do. And I think the reason why, and that we will come back to that with the ladies, the reason why I often work with women in public spaces is that historically architecture is very patriarchal and it is very authoritarian. It also defines how we move. It defines our movement through space, and it guides, it provides particular kind of codes, and in our environment now, particularly in our cities, is highly codified. And I will come back to that a little bit later when we talk about the ladies. While I was still in Berlin, I came across a little booklet. At the end of my street, there's the Jeffrey Museum, and they had a booklet on street celebrations that had happened in the East End. And this led to a long-term project that I worked on with Film and Video Umbrella, and made one of the sort of earlier part of like the most significant video and film works in my practice, called Celebration Cypress Street, where I worked with one particular street in the East End and restaged what we see in these images. What fascinated me about these photographs is that it's not just about the street celebrations and the fact that arguably the streets at that time, from the early 20th century till maybe 1980s, functioned much more as social units. So the street was part of an environment, it was part of a neighborhood, it was used by the streets jointly by the residents. Street parties happened particularly in the East End, not just for the kind of usual jubilees and big events, but also because it was somebody's birthday, or a strike was called off, or a new factory was opened. All sorts of reasons were used to have big street celebrations. But what fascinates me in these images that are then found was that within the larger celebration, the street celebration that lasted all day, from early mornings when they swept the streets till late at night, are the photographs. Every time someone would come along to take photographs, to take one group photograph, so a street photographer, professional street photographer, would come along and take these images that would then probably sit on everybody's mantelpiece. So the image becomes the collective memory. This one image is what everybody then shares and thinks back to and looks back to as an object that holds the memory of all the people present at the time. So I was really fascinated by these ideas and proposed to one particular street in the East End that had a huge history of street celebrations to work with me over a number of months to set up a street celebration and make a film. So we had a whole set of activities, and right in the middle of these activities, there was, you know, a long table, there were lots of children's activities, but right in the middle of it, we made a film, and the film was made as one continuous shot as the camera rolled on a huge truck through the streets, very, very slowly past all these activities. And then right in the middle of the street, everybody congregated. So about 300 people, all the residents of the street were there, and they congregated in front of the camera to stand as if a historical group photograph was taken. They stand, they fidget, they move a tiny bit, and then suddenly they break up and everybody moves on. So to finish this little whistle to a stop through some of the work I've been doing over the years that involve groups and public spaces, just to kind of mention 3 related projects that are all, they're connected through a particular activity, through an action, through a gesture, and that is the one of dancing. And dancing is really significant and has a huge part in my practice, because dancing is something that we all do, all in the sense of like across cultures, across times, across geographies, people dance. They've always danced. Dancing is very ritualistic, but also, again, it connects us to our inherent sociality, brings us together. It is meaningful beyond the sort of just the kind of moment of taking a particular kind of step. But it's also meaningful because there are all these different kinds of dances, these different forms of dances that speak to the different cultures and histories, in a sense, languages that they come from. So these 3 projects started with one called Dancehall Night Paris, made in Paris in 2011, Dancehall Night London 2017, and the latest one, which I literally just finished in lockdown a few weeks ago, is called Dancing's the Best Revenge. It was made in Switzerland, in Biel. And what they share, even though they're all very different, is that in each case I bring together dancers from completely different dancing backgrounds, dancing forms, dance cultures, from samba to waltz to hip hoppers, flamenco, capoeira dancers, can-can dancers, and they all come together in a space and dance together side by side. So this is the one that we made in Paris in 2011. In each case, they're commissioned by different kinds of festivals, organizations, and museums. This one is the one that we made in London in 2017, and which was commissioned by Art Night. And that's an image from, so it culminated in an all-night dance where the dance companies representing these different forms of dance gave dance lessons to hundreds upon hundreds of people all night long. And the last one was made in Biel, filmed exactly a year ago and finished in lockdown a couple of weeks ago, which is mainly filmed on a drone, so abstracting the dance. And these drone shots are then intersected by brief moments of very, very close-up portraits of people. So now to come to the ladies and then come back to Andrew and Shahida to talk together. The ladies, the invitation to work on a project with a group of again, women in North Cambridge was fantastic. And I was immediately really, really interested in engaging in the ideas. And I discussed with Andrew fairly early on that I was really interested in proposing that we would start by looking at the history of feminist performance art. And there was one artist in particular that I wanted to bring into this kind of discussion. And it was a bit of a gamble maybe initially, because I wasn't sure whether, you know, this particular work would resonate. And it, quite often in all the work that I do, start off with a lengthy process of research. And I really like having reference images around. I really like thinking about other people's work. I really like embedding the work within a wider discussion. I think artwork does continue discussions that are already vibrant and that might go back a number of generations. But Valley Export has been an artist who's always been really important to me. So before we go back and start a discussion on the process, I just wanted to very briefly talk about these images that I showed to the group. And it's a series called Body Configurations, made between 1972 and 1976. And in her series Body Configurations, she challenges, in a sense, codified gender expressions by situating her body inside and around particular kind of patriarchal architectures, and literally sort of forming herself around, alongside, and into these architectural shapes. And I think what Valley Export has always done, from a very, very strong feminist position, is acting upon and within kind of frameworks and challenging them and asking us through her body to rethink them. And I think what she reminds us of, that it's important to stage the female body within the sort of like the grand kind of quite often theatrical stages of architecture, and to consider the female body within these stages, because quite often they are dominated by a patriarchal view. And to me, and I do like this a lot, I think she does endlessly take risks, and that's what I wanted to finish on. I think making art is always a risk. It needs to be a risk. We need to be risk-taking in order to possibly kind of like find something new and to contribute something new to an ongoing conversation. So on that note, I thought we'll go back to having a conversation. Shahida and Andrew, we can talk amongst each other.
Perona, could you run the sequence of the ladies' images? So we have those running, and those who don't know them can begin to get to know them, having heard Melanie's wonderful and brilliantly concise description and discussion around some of her works. Many of those themes will make sense in a minute. So hopefully in a moment, those of you who are watching, you'll see some installation shots from Actions from the show at Kettle's Yard in 2018. You can see Melanie Manchester, the Ladies series, looking through a sculpture by Alice Channer. And these will just run the sequence. Now, Shahida, what did you think about this? Tell us about your experience of the project and perhaps how it began for you.
Well, I'd like to say good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us. I think when I first met Melanie and I did some research, I found out more about Melanie. I thought, wow, such an amazing artist. But how I came about to get involved in the art project itself, Nairne from the BBC, she was working at the BBC at the time, so she contacted me and she said, you might be interested in an art project. And I said, okay, can you tell me more about that? And so she put me in touch with Karen Thomas, the community officer at Kettle's Yard. And then we had a meeting. We also met Guy Haywood, who was the curator of Kettle's Yard at the time. Together with Melanie, you might remember that as well. We sat together and Melanie said, can I get a group of Bangladeshi women together? So initially I thought this might be quite difficult, getting a group of Bangladeshi women together, because some of them don't like having their photos taken. Some of them are very shy. And I thought that's a bit of a challenge. But thankfully Lutfa, who was one of the participants in the photographs, she got a group of ladies together, and that's how it was. So we all got together with Melanie, and I think with the ladies, we did it in a place where these Bangladeshi women wouldn't normally go and visit, these beautiful spaces, part of Cambridge. So you can see the top, it's the debating chamber. So that was a quite interesting one. But we also went to the American Cemetery, and it was just, amazing to come together and see these ladies actually enjoying this space and being part of these photos. And I think, they're absolutely amazing. I was very proud to be part of that, but I didn't realize how popular they would be. But at the opening of the new Kettle's Yard, we did go and see the exhibition, and they just looked beautiful. I had one comment from somebody saying they look more like paintings rather than photos. But I think the one in the King's College dining hall was probably the most popular one. But they're all absolutely beautiful. So I really enjoyed being part of that.
And Melanie, tell us how, or between the two of you, how did you choose these locations? We have the Wren Library at Trinity College, a very famous ancient library that you can visit as a tourist, or teachers and students and postgraduates are there. You have the American Cemetery, which is rather different, up in North Cambridge. You have the dining hall at King's College, so that's also part of the university. And where are we? And we have the debating chamber at the Cambridge University Union. So these were spaces, as you said, Shahida, that you wouldn't normally have access to. But how did that, did those spaces, did you work those ones out relatively quickly? I was thinking that all four of them suggest very powerfully, the cemetery suggests notions of memory. Who do we choose to remember? The library makes you think, well, who is in this library? What do these books talk about? Whose stories do they tell? Who has access to these stories? The dining hall, you could argue, who has access to Cambridge College, to the kind of discourse that happens. And then the debating chamber, who is, who has access? Who's part of the discussions that shape political debate and ultimately political change? Back to you, Melanie. Tell us a little bit.
So what I hugely enjoyed was when we first met as a group, Shahida, and the groups were formed quite organically, and it was kind of, in a sense, it was you who kind of like brought in one person invited another person, so it formed itself. And the title, I mean, just to sort of say the title really comes from you guys, that you refer to each other, and or some of the women refer to the group as the ladies, so it wasn't a title that I sort of in a sense put onto you. It was more, it came from you and from the group, that that this is a group that refers to itself as the ladies. I think we had time, which was great. So we met quite a few times, and we met first in a kind of community center and had a chat. We looked at some of Wally Export's work. We looked at a lot of photographs. We looked at some other performance art, and I sort of proposed a few ideas that were around this idea of architectures, and that ultimately Cambridge is, it's the university in Cambridge is so powerful and so strong, and it's historical. And so we started off by identifying a number of different locations jointly that we might be interested in, and then we went for a walk. Then, initially it was really just to go for a walk and have a look at them and see which ones we'd like. And I remember this very clearly as I took a camera along, and Shahida, you very clearly also at the time pointed out that some people might not like to be photographed. So I had a whole range of ideas of what we could do around, there's this clothing or hands or body parts, or that it wouldn't necessarily be a portrait as such. And on the first walk, I had a camera just to take photographs of the locations, and quite a few of you, and I think Lutwa was quite good at getting everybody involved. So I said, no, why don't we, we can just stand in location and you get an idea of what it might look like. And then you also start to arrange each other, rather than just me saying, oh, you could stand here and how about this? There were, from that very, very first kind of initial research walk, there were all sorts of images that we took that are not part of this body of work. There were research images, but it was kind of, in a really interesting way, and to me quite surprising in the most positive sense of it could be surprising. It became very light. There was a lightness and there was a playfulness.
But in contrast, Melanie, in contrast to the Moscow work, there is a sense of posing, there is a sense of poses. And I was trying to find a word for this when I wrote a short piece about the ladies. And I thought, I don't know whether you agree with this, Shahida, I thought there was a nonchalant, am I saying the word correctly? A sort of nonchalant feeling, a sort of balance between we're going to relax, but also we're going to sort of have a certain kind of ownership, for the period of time we're there. And of course, what's extraordinary about photography is it has, however many times you're told that photography lies, you believe it. And artists like Melanie are so clever at playing with our belief in photography. This notion of truth never disappears. And so somehow it becomes a kind of truth. But Shahida, tell us about going from visiting the place to these, as you say, very painterly beautiful. You're wearing, as I understand, sort of traditional clothes. And they have a fantastically choreographed but relaxed feeling about them. Shahida.
Yes, I have to say the ladies were very relaxed, and that was quite surprising because I thought they'd be very shy. But I think we all worked together very well. As Melanie said, we all coordinated it together well. And I think they were really amazed just to be in those places, to actually sit there, relax and have photos taken. So it didn't really seem like a photography session. We were just there. It was almost like a day out, just visiting the places. But I think it was, how we all sort of worked together very quickly, very calmly. It just worked out very, very well. And I think it was something that, again, as I explained before, that these ladies wouldn't normally visit these places. And some of them had little limited English, not all of them. But Naima is also in the images as well. But I have to say, I'm just very, very proud that I could be part of that. And I hope Melanie enjoyed working with us as much as we enjoyed working with Melanie.
I certainly did. No, it was a huge pleasure. And I do feel, that to me, the camaraderie that exists between and amongst your group and this group of women, this real sense of support. And I think that's, particularly with, a couple who were possibly initially a little bit more outspoken, it then created a sense of taking ownership and taking authorship over the images. And to me, it's fundamentally important. I'm actually not interested in making a series of images about, in fact, that was one of the initial conversations, even with you, Andrew, and with Karen, that, it would feel really problematic to make a series of photographs about you, but what was really essential, and as I've said this from early on, that if it was to work, it would have to work with, and that we were doing this together. It's a conversation. And these images, in a sense, are a conversation where you guys are actually speaking probably a lot more than me. In a sense, speaking as in visually, how you are in these images. You made a lot of the decisions, what you were wearing, who was in which place, quite often gestures were sort of discussed between the whole group, and how about you put your arm here and you do this, and I think that also this sort of sense of what you say, sense of ownership in those places was really, to me, really interesting and important. That when we were in the library, it was your library. For that time, it felt like it was your library. And
it was probably my favorite place, actually, the library.
If we can, two things to say. One is, those of you who are watching, please ask some questions. I think Prona will allow you to do that, hopefully, and we can look at your questions. And also, yes, great, let's have a look at the one of the main Wren Library images. And many people remarked on this when they saw it in actions at Kettle's Yard, how it had a sort of Renaissance feeling about it, or perhaps Northern Renaissance feeling, very sort of beautifully posed. But there's something about, if you look at the hands of the women, of the ladies, what they're doing with their hands. I mean, it's also, I think people found them, Shahida, very witty as well. At first sight, they found them amusing, witty, beautiful. And then it seems to me that drew the viewer in, and still does draw the viewer in. And then you realize that actually there's a kind of radical and serious sort of feeling about these photographs in terms of what they're doing. And when I was thinking about this earlier, there's a kind of activism built into them. And I used to say to people looking at this image, but also at the one at King's, when was the last time 7 Bangladeshi women were anywhere near the dining hall at King's College? And that's, I'm afraid, an indictment of where we are in the university at this time, and where we are generally in many parts of British society. Obviously, change is happening. I hope change will happen more quickly. But how do we make change happen more quickly? And one of the ways it can happen is through a projected future, is through a kind of what could happen. So I hope we're going to get some questions in a minute. But were you aware, Shahida, of this sense that you were imagining, this was a sort of future that doesn't exist? Does that make any sense?
Yes, no, absolutely. I think this probably has to be my favorite place because we managed to see the first Winnie the Pooh manuscript. So that was the first time I saw it in the Wren Library. It's an amazing place, it really is. And I think when we were touching the books, we were very careful. They were very delicate, but it was just an amazing place. And I think, for us to, especially the lady in the pink, I think she really stands out, and she was more relaxed than any of us, I think. But as I said, it was just an amazing place to see. And it was my very first visit there. So yeah, it was an amazing day.
And the American cemetery photograph, I don't know whether we can see that, might come up in a moment, but that also has a sort of oddly, let me see, I've got it here and I can see it beside me as well. Yes.
There we go. Yeah.
Oop, maybe we can see it. There it is, bottom right. Shahida, is that you on the right there, perhaps?
Yes, in the black dress. That's me standing there.
Oh, in the black dress. Yeah.
Yes, I do remember, Melanie. It was a little bit cold on that day, wasn't it? Because we did it in October, but that didn't put us off at all. I think we enjoyed just being there, and it was very calm, very peaceful, and I think it fitted the mood to the photos that we were taking. So, yeah, and I thought Melanie did a fantastic job just telling us how to stand and which way to look. So, yeah, I enjoyed standing on that slopey bit of the stairs, but that was good.
I'm going to bring in one of the questions that's come in from Fiona Fitzgerald, who's asked, who would normally have access to the Wren Library? Well, as I say, you can, I think anybody can go. I think you have to pay a fee to there's a charge to go and see it. But otherwise access would be researchers, those who have some evidence that they are serious researchers. So there is, to be fair, there is access, but it's true you can't just meander off the street. And also it's quite far in to Trinity College, isn't it? It's in the second court. So I've answered that one. And then someone called Alex has asked, it was so interesting to hear Melanie talk about the power of a group portrait. Obviously, Cambridge as a university is dominated by individual painted portraits. And I wondered if that was something you considered, or how you think group portraiture challenges the wider tradition of individual portraits. That's interesting. Melanie.
Oh, it's such a big question. We could talk about this for a long time. Painted portraiture obviously has a very particular tradition and talks a lot about hierarchies. It talks about class. It talks about monetary structures. Talks about who is in, who has the power and the ability to commission a portrait, and to have a painted portrait of whoever it is speaks much more about their position in society than necessarily about their likeness. So often portraiture is associated with the idea of representing someone and giving an image of someone, but actually it gives much more than an image of someone. It gives an image of their position and their power. In that respect, I mean, group portraiture equally does that, even painted group portraiture, and the history of group portraiture in painting is always about positioning. Who is standing at the center, who is standing at the back, who is lit, who is in the shadows. If you think about Rembrandt, the group portraits that he's painted, it's absolutely who paid the most money, who kind of, who is standing where. And so I think the history of group portraiture, even in painting, says a lot about society and about the kind of structures within society. So for me, group portraiture is very much about this constant oscillation that happens within each of us between our sense of, it comes back to this kind of big question, what is the sense of self? What is our consciousness? How do we define our subjectivity? And I think we inevitably define it through the relations we have to people and places, objects to an extent, but mainly people and places. who are huge signifiers in our understanding of identity. So group portraiture is a really powerful way to articulate people's relationship to other people and to places.
Thank you. We have another question here, which Shahida, I'm going to come to you, and you said something a moment ago. What was the immediate impact on the viewing public of these images when they were shown? I mean, I can make a wider comment about that, but just say again, did you feel that you tell us what your reaction, and not perhaps just the ladies, but others and friends and people who you knew, what they thought?
Yeah, I think those who saw the publicity, and it was featured in Channel 4 News and other news outlets, I think it came down very, very well. I had a lot of positive comments. I even got recognised in a shop once, and one of the ladies said, "Oh, did you feature one of the photos in Kettle's Yard?" And I said yes. So that was wonderful just to be able to talk to her about that. But she was saying how amazing it was. And one thing she did mention is this kind of portrait has never been done before, if I'm correct, Melanie. But I think, you know, for me to be part of that, I'm just really proud, and it's just truly amazing. And it's just something that Melanie's created is very, very unique. And, you know, I hope for many years to come, this will be seen in the same way. But yeah, I just have to say, you know, I've still got the postcards at home, and it's just amazing to be recognised in that way, to be part of that, the series.
No, that's great to hear. And somebody has also asked a question, Joanna, who sort of said, what do your friends and family think? And also who decided the final poses? But it does sound, and I wasn't there, but it does sound as though, as you were saying earlier, Melanie and Shahid, it really was a genuine collaboration to create these beautiful, because they are beautiful images. I feel we could have, the point could have been made. These are spaces that don't normally give access to Bangladeshi women or all kinds of people in Cambridge. And there is a divide. There's a lot of good work happening, but of course there is a divide between images of Cambridge as a famous place linked to the university, and Cambridge as an actual city that has many communities and is actually very diverse and isn't just associated in reality on the ground with the university. Yeah, somebody else is saying, what's the lasting impact? Well, I mean, we were obviously at Kettle's Yard absolutely delighted that King's College did buy purchased one of the main pieces that was in the show. It's true that there's a wonderful sort of double irony, isn't there, Melanie, that you'd be able to get into the dining hall at King's in order to see the image of the dining hall at King's. I mean, we can all get our heads around that. But perhaps we need to, I need to check how many of the postcards we've got left. Thinking of Perona's introduction, we need to keep the postcards alive and out there. I mean, it would be lovely if Trinity, and if anyone's on the line from Trinity, it'd be great if Trinity College did rethink and perhaps purchase the ones of the library, because they're so terrific. I want us, in the time we've got left, and I'll keep an eye on the questions, but I want us to bring it back, both of you, but perhaps Melanie first, to the sense in which these images are kind of activist, you know, they're sort of alive in some way. They're static, they're within a history of photography. You gave a brilliant account, Melanie, of how you looked at value export and some of the influences, but they are an active proposition, it seems to me. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, way to say, kind of from my position generally, and when I look across my entire practice, I think art has a social contract with its time and place and responsibility. So I think the work that we make always, hopefully, pushes a debate and pushes a discussion further. So yes, I mean, you know, to be quite frank about it, there is an activist position in recognizing that what you already said, that particular kind of groups of people are not necessarily recognized within an relatively authoritarian structure that is a kind of traditional university. I mean, women for a long time, you know, were not part of the university structure. If you think historically, it's not that long that there were women colleges in Cambridge. You know, if you think about, you know, the kind of history of emancipation. So the activist point of it is that it really points to what work is to be done. That they, you know, in terms of mutual recognition, that the university and other authoritarian structures recognize the multiplicity and the diversity of its communities around us, that, you know, that they can only bring more a richer kind of understanding of the world through these kind of structures. And the necessity to open these, you know, to open minds and open doors and think multiple. I think, yeah, in many ways.
And there's a sense, Melanie, of literally embodying a change many of us want to see. Actually, can we visualize what the change would look like, essentially, is what these works say to some extent. But I think they do manage to say them in a way that you don't feel as though you've been sort of bashed over the head, because they're so carefully, they're so sort of beautiful as well. And we haven't really talked about the painterly side of it, which is absolutely there. Shahida, what are your thoughts?
I think Melanie started something new, and I hope that other artists will follow suit, because as you said before, Cambridge is a university city. I myself, I was born and raised here. My father came over 60 years ago, he settled here. And to be part of this kind of project, it really says something, you know, for me to be able to represent the Bangladeshi community in some photos that were put up in Cambridge University in a King's College. So I think, you know, I do hope that other artists will look at the same and you know, make these kind of photos. But I think, I don't think anyone can compare to Melanie and the series that she's created. So, you know, well done and thank you for allowing us to be part of that, Melanie. I think it's just been absolutely amazing.
But it was us together, you know, it is very much a collaboration. So, you know, congratulations to you, you know, for.
Thank you. You made us feel easy as well on the day, and it just worked so well. And it was more like, as I said before, a day out rather than a photo session. So it was.
I absolutely still get a lot of pleasure by looking at those individual participants and their poses. So perhaps, Perona, we can see the images again running through in the last few minutes, and we can just see those beside us. Perhaps, hopefully, will come up. I'm keeping an eye on questions. There was a question about whether the American Cemetery is open to the public, and the answer is I don't know, but I assume it is. Oh, there we go. We can see.
I think it is.
As I say, I love the hat.
So that's me on the bottom left.
There's a very witty one, particularly if you look at the top right, if everyone's saying the same thing to me. Oops, whizzed past. There's one where touching a ladder, which always makes me laugh, Shahida.
So that was Nairne.
Is that Nairne there? Yes.
Yes, and I'm on the bottom left. So I was holding on to a trolley that had books on. But yes, that's quite interesting.
I mean, Melanie, you know what you're doing here. They have reference to certain kinds of paintings, don't they, I think? Yeah. Let's see if another one comes through. We're on the roll here. I mean, the debating chamber one, also, in that one, actually, some of you do look a bit fed up, if I may say so, which is fair enough.
No, we weren't at all. I think it was probably the last one we did on the day, didn't we, Melanie? Was it after lunch or something? But yes, I mean, no, we enjoyed it. None of us are fed up. It was amazing.
Again, it's a very playful idea that, you know, this is a debating chamber. And, you know, you have the two sides of it's almost like a court, you know, it's sort of set up and you know, you imagine that the other side has some other people who are debating with you. So it's more, it's actually more playful than being necessarily so serious.
Yeah, they had the main speaker's chair as well. So we sat there and had photos taken. So Melanie took so many more photos, but
loads now.
Yes, so we sat there individually and we had photos taken on that speaker's chair. So that was quite interesting.
We need to find, there will be, I'm sure, another opportunity for this wonderful series, The Ladies, to be shown together, and perhaps there'll be an art section where we can see some of the other photographs that were made at the same time. I think we're pretty much at the end of our time. Can I thank everybody who's been watching and anybody who watches this in the future, but particularly thank Shahida, Rahman and Melanie Manchester, who have joined me in this conversation, and Perona Prasad from the Hyong Gallery, who's sort of made it happen. We're obviously all delighted to be part of the We Are Here Symposium, and let's all keep thinking about what art can do, what change it can make, and how it can imagine a different future. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's my turn to say thank you to all of you. It was absolutely fascinating today to just sit back and listen. And it's an entirely selfish, it's sort of self-serving kind of initiative of mine to set up this panel, because these are the sorts of things that, the sorts of discussions and kind of insights that I knew would come from it, having spoken to Melanie before. Thank you, Shahida, and thank you for participating and perching precariously on a marble stair, railing even.
Thank you.
And as somebody, so somebody on YouTube asked a question, which I thought I might share with you, asked whether, initiatives like this would work the other way as well, in encouraging audiences and communities who don't necessarily kind of engage with Cambridge institutions to actually explore them a bit more.
Absolutely. If I could answer that, I think one of the things that Karen said to me, Karen Thomas, our community officer, she said that Shahid, the group of continued art, have been connected with other projects we've been doing. And we've been trying to, in particularly North Cambridge, in parts of Cambridge that are not so connected to the university and where people have all kinds of challenges in their lives, we want to encourage a kind of cultural confidence, if you like, where absolutely those communities can initiate the projects themselves. We can support, we can provide a frame, but they make the first kind of move. And that would be another seminar, another symposium. But it's true that it's such a good question, really important that it isn't all coming sort of, if you like, out from the Arts Centre. But I do think with this project, and it's a great tribute to Melanie as the artist, that really, and Shahida we've heard from, that it was a genuine collaboration, and that we had enough time to make it work in that way.
Well, thank you all for a really, really insightful session. I just wanted to say that this is our penultimate session. We've had, this is number 5, and our final session is tomorrow. It's with the artists Kathy de Manchot and Yelena Popova, talking about actually making art for colleges. And I'm so glad that this exhibition that people could only see for 11 days before we had to close has been generating these kinds of discussions. And thank you all for giving us your time this evening. I will now unceremoniously remove all of you from the panel, but
Thank you. Bye-bye.
after we say goodbye.